Okay, thank you everybody for joining the Value Add webinar. And Andy, I'm going to turn it over to you to begin the discussion.
All right, thank you, sir. So thank you as well to everyone for attending, and thank you to our panelists ahead of time for participating today and speaking about what you do in your own businesses, doing assembly and service, value add, kitting, so on and so forth. But what I wanted to get out of the way up front here was make sure everyone's on the same page that's listening in today. This webinar came about for two reasons, really. One, I'd seen more and more questions coming up on the TUG board about value add, about kitting, about we send something out to be coated, or we're making something out of these other parts. How do we do this in SX? How does SX support this? We're doing it in SX, but we've run into these roadblocks. It's not working as we thought it would. Someone please help. And the second was, the more and more folks I speak with that are using it, have been using it for a while, they end up having mods, workarounds. They have virtual warehouses to do certain functions. They have to use stock adjustments to keep things in line, or they're tracking certain functions in Excel outside of the ERP. And some folks are even using a completely different software package to do some very simple assembly or light manufacturing. And the point to all of this has been summed up in a number of posts online, and that is distribution for many companies now is no longer just buying a widget, turning it around, and selling it. They're doing something to it. They're adding some services. They're doing some assembly. They're adding something onto that product, and the main functionality in SX may or may not support what they're doing anymore. And should Infor be looking at changing SX to be able to support that type of business? If that's what we're all going to be doing, then yes, it absolutely should be doing that. So that's my goal at the end of this, is to let these panelists share what they're doing, what they're struggling with. Everyone on the call can ask questions, throw in their 2 cents, their feelings about it. But then I'd like to get this group together collectively and start to put together a list of what we feel needs to exist to support these processes in our businesses. So I'd like to take that then to Infor. Unfortunately, no one from Infor is on the call today that we know of. But I'd like to take that list to Infor and say, this is what the users are asking for. They say needs to be in the software. Do you support this decision? Will you make this happen? If need be, can we co-develop these changes? If 20, 30, 40 companies will throw in some money, we can get some really substantial changes. And other major changes have been done like that in the past from large groups of users, whether they're, HVAC or electrical. We've done that in the past with Infor. So I think this is another opportunity to make some big changes and help everyone who needs this functionality. So since I'm not an expert in value add or assembly or service or anything like that, we have a group of panelists today who are going to share their experience with VA or kitting or combination of the two in SX.enterprise. And they're just going to have a few minutes to say, this is what we do, this is what we like about it, this is what doesn't work very well, here are the workarounds we have in place, and then even throw in their 2 cents on it really needs to do this, that, or the other also to make us happy. So David White, I will turn it over to you. Please start us off.
All right, thanks, Andy. Hi, everybody. And Andy told me I had 5 minutes, and I really need just about a minute. The functionality that brought us to value add was that we source things from one of our key suppliers. We send them to another supplier who then does other things to them, and then they send them to us. And that's a really tough workflow in base SX.e or in kitting, but that workflow works just outstandingly in value add in that we can do a vendor direct purchase order to source something and have it sent to, again, another operator to do some additional work to it. We can add in multiple freights, so freight for the original source to the second source, and then that source into us. We can add in their charges for whatever they're doing to it along the way. That kind of functionality Value Add does a wonderful job of keeping track of where all that stuff is and where it's going and accumulating all of the expenses associated with it. And because you can deal with vendor direct POs and those things, it keeps that inventory from showing up in your building before it really does show up as whatever the final product is. So again, buying one thing, extra work happening to it, comes in as something else, similar to kitting. The parts of it that we struggle with are overages and underages. We've built in what we consider to be a normal usage scrap level, if you will, typically 2.5% or 3%, whatever the effective success rate is of that converter in the middle. But there is no allowance in value add for overages or underages. So if you set it up for 2,500, and again we're a TWL warehouse, when it hits our building, if they actually today we had one, it was 2,500, 2,576 showed up. In receiving, they received in 2,576, and the willet fails for TWL because it can't receive more than the kits on the back end allowed for. So that's one of our problems that we have with that is overage and underage to deal with scrap. And clunky workflows are because value add is typically a lot of what we do are kits for our assemblies. Value add is a workflow outside of that, so it ends up somewhat of a clunky workflow that's not as intuitive as working through a kit, for example. The workaround we have, which unfortunately today didn't get stamped, was receive exact quantity only. So again, that's the workaround that Andy kind of mentioned, where if we order 2,500, receiving's got to receive 2,500, and then do a stock adjustment for the pluses or minuses. If they leave anything dangling, it all fails, and then we're back to trying to fix it. And that's my experience with it. Again, I love the concept, still rough around the edges.
Very good. Thanks, David. Derek, take us on next, please.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I come from a company called Hand Supply, and we do a lot of rigging slings, so wire rope and nylon type of sling assemblies that we use value add for. And while we do like value add for all its functionality, we found that a lot of our production folks have a lot of pain regarding the processing of value adds and making sure the components line up correctly. And we're still very new on SX. We went live in March of this year, so we're on a steep learning curve right now. But there's a lot of things that do work well in terms of the functionality, creating POs for components and doing external VAs, sending out our assemblies for zinc plating or components for zinc plating and bringing them back in. The traceability is fantastic. You can it links up nicely with the work orders and the POs. But we found a lot of the underneath parts where quantity order calculations and pricing calculations weren't enough in the standard VA, that we had to do a lot of modifications underneath just to make sure that the components that of the slings that we make calculate correctly. Also with our production departments, they're also trying to, they're on the back end trying to process the VA, but they're also on the front end making the VA. And they're not the most computer literate people, and they just want to move on and get to the next thing. So they're creating a lot of errors when they're trying to force VAs through the system that have component back orders or needing POs, and they swap components all the time. So the tough part is trying to get our users to really embrace it and use VA for all functionalities. One thing that we are really missing right now, actually, and this is coming from our president, but he wants to get a quick pricing tool for the VA. So, because we do a lot of custom assemblies and swapping hubs and adding different pieces, our manufactured goods. You know, we want a way of quickly giving out a price to a customer when they call up and say, I want this sling, rather than having to go through the order process and the quoting process. Just a quick screen, you type in the part number, and you see all the components and cost and the roll-up price to give a price to the customer. So again, we're very new to SX, and we have a lot of users that are still not embracing the change in the system. But you know, I can see how value add has a lot of functionality. So yeah, that's pretty much my experience with it.
Thank you, Derek. That quick pricing tool was something that had never occurred to me before. But yeah, to do anything where assembly is required and you have to put components together, you almost have to build it before you can price it. So you've taken all that time just to get a price to someone for them to say, oh, no, thank you.
Yep. Andy, this is David. Andy, this is David. Just 2 cents on that. In a recent release notes, I think that the configure price quote module that Infor has been added to VA. Now, again, we aren't using configure price quote, but I'm pretty sure I read that in release notes. So check something for like, 10.3 or something release notes and see if there's not something there where that module might now work in VA also, I think.
I know. Thanks, David. I know that there were some big changes to it, how it worked and rolled into the order as well, that it wasn't going to be a build on demand or whatever it was before. I'm not that familiar with that module. John, I think you are up next.
All right, I'm John Kociuba. I'm the Gear Center Group ERP Manager, and our business focus primarily in the heavy truck industry. So we do obviously sell truck part components, but a bigger part of our business is remanufacturing truck part components, differentials, transmissions, steering, that type of thing. No different than if you go to an automotive shop and you buy an alternator, what have you. We do actually use quite a few of the modules in SX, service warranty, kit production. And what really drug us to value add prior to going live in 2007 was the ability to close a work order and have the item in stock. When we initially bought service warranty, of course, to get the items in stock, you had to do invoice processing to get that in stock, and that's very, very difficult for us when we're trying to sell it same day. So we purchased a value add module. Unfortunately, we're on a little bit of an older release, 55040, where some of it is still not GUI-ized, but we are currently upgrading to a newer version. But what we found very quickly with it is that, as I said, the first thing is that we could close work orders and have the items instantly in stock to sell. Of course, tying it in OEs, that type of thing. Another great feature that many of you know is, of course, work in progress. Our accountants love to see work in progress. So as you slowly build the product, of course, the inventory leaves, items leave inventory and then move into a work in progress account until the job is finished. And then, of course, all the costs get accumulated and then moved into the final product. Another feature for us, so we loved, is that we could do finished products as a non-stock. That's huge for us. Not everything we have is set up in SX. So when we do have customers with special needs, of course, we can add a non-stock and build it. Of course, a lot of this stuff that we do is not necessarily when a customer asks for it. Some of this is for stock. So what we really like as well is the fact that we can exploit a RAR, so what I call a VA RAR. So we do have multiple branches that do run. They only build product that are on the VA RARs. So those are entered daily to the branches, and that's how they build some of their stock. As well, with a lot of the part numbers set up, of course, you have to have templates set up, so that can be very difficult. I don't know about the newer versions, but I'm a big fan of the data conversion utility. So Linda Wright did give us the ability to do that. So we're now able to mass load templates for all of our rebuilt product, and it's thousands of part numbers and thousands. Some of the struggles we have, of course, is ordering controls. We'd like to see, obviously, some of the feature functionality carried over from OE, PO, Grant Howard logic. So, of course, we'd like to see, average lead time into the picture. So the big problem we have today is that if we build a unit rush down, of course, the lead time becomes 1 day and the ordering controls get recalculated. So what we had to do to work around that is, of course, we have to freeze some of our lead time. So we'll monitor how much inventory we do have, and if it's too much or too little, we'll adjust and freeze the lead time. Of course, we'd like to see as well standard pack. We don't want to always build just one. If it's something we want to build 5 or 10 of, we want to be able the SX to open the work order for 10 as opposed to just singles. I'm really not going to comment much more about any of the workarounds we have. I mean, obviously we have to upgrade, so I don't really want to skew the discussion. But one that does come up quite often is scheduling. You have a bunch of work orders that are open or VAs that are open. Which ones are priority, which ones are not. Again, something that SX lacks. So outside of that, that's my end of it.
Very good, John. That was a really good list. Thank you. I want to say before we move on to Shelly, if you have questions, go ahead and send them into the chat panel now. Don't worry about waiting till the end. We'll gather those, and then Gary will read those out at the end when we have time for Q&A. But don't bullpen all of them. Just throw them out as they come up, as you think of them. Send them to Gary in the chat panel, and then we'll collect all of them and go through it at the end. Shelly, you're up to that.
Hi, everyone. This is Shelly Lamb. I'm the Business Applications Manager for Shorr Packaging. We use kitting and VA. The kitting we use for printing boxes mostly, so it's taking a box, printing a logo on it, and turning it into another product. Pretty straightforward. So we had a need to actually use a converter to convert some of our film that we're buying direct from the supplier, shipping it into the converter. They turn it into another product, and we either ship it into our warehouse or we ship it direct to the customer. And so we found that kitting wasn't going to work for us because it wasn't going to roll up all those costs. So we purchased the VA module. Now, while we've been on SX.e for about 7 years, we are new to the VA module. And some of the stuff that I'm going to say, I have to kind of set the stage, we need additional training. That's one of the things that we're lacking, is additional training. We don't know what we don't know yet. So we have run into quite a few issues with this, one of them being that we're still on 5.5. So I think we're lacking some of that GUI feature that I'm told is in the newer versions. But with this film, while it is on a roll, we have to bring it down to the inch to get the correct calculations and roll up those costs. And that poses a huge problem for us because the character limit on a lot of the fields throughout SX.e and the VA module, it will not allow us to extend out to the tens and 100 millions of inches. So that's been quite cumbersome for us. And I think someone mentioned before with the overages and underage, ours is never exact. So we struggle with that, especially when you have to create the PO, and then once you create that final step, it's done. So we've had a lot of issues, and we've come up with some workarounds where we found if you don't print that PO, then you can still do the changes. So we use MIPS to print a purchase order to get to the converter, which doesn't trigger the purchase order to be printed in SX.e. So, you know, we'd like to see a lot of changes, but again, we're so new to VA that some of these just could be training. So we're really interested in hearing other people's suggestions or recommendations to the system.
Very good. Excellent point on training. We're so focused on the functionality that's in the software but who knows how to use it and who knows how to train the next users going onto it. If there aren't any experts out there to train, then it doesn't really matter if the functionality is there. You have to learn it yourself, right?
Right.
So I think that's an excellent segue. That's worked out perfectly. Let's segue into CDS. Both Scott and Daryl are going to pitch in from CDS. They're an import channel partner, so they help implement the VA module. So they see it from a different side than many of the users do. Scott, go ahead.
Hey, I'm Scott Smithson from CDS. I'm senior business consultant there, and I am a VA expert. So I've implemented VA for the most common thing, which is simple external POs going out to someplace to have something coded, changed, cut, or whatever, and brought back, to creating fully automated hydraulic valve assemblies or nuclear power plant cooling systems and things like that. So all the way from rigging, which and slings, packaging, machining parts, control systems, and all of those kinds of things. So we've got a wide range of experience implementing just about anything we've run across in VA. And for the most part, there are a lot of things that VA can do and do extremely well. And other parts, there are some difficulties. So recently there have been some really nice improvements that CDS has helped co-develop as well. So things like variable length components, so that you could build things like hose assemblies, and where something, where a sales order will prompt you for a length of an item, and the tied VA will run along. And we've also modified that extensively for certain people who can raise their hand if they want to. The rules-based configurator has been added into VA, which is the ability to set rules that, component X can only go with component Y. And, if you're building something like, siding or something, you only want, right-hand assembly, right-hand parts going with right-hand doors and things like that. And then another really underused feature is the virtual production warehouse that where you can tie things to, a specific warehouse, and all the transfers in the background don't need to be processed. They just happen. So, but for the most part, I've discovered over the years that the number one problem and the biggest potential for improvement in value add is that the user interface is very, very clunky. The number one complaint is that you have multiple tabs across the top and on the side, and in order to do something as simple as adding a line item to a section, it takes a couple clicks just to get there, depending on how you set up your profile. And none of that is popular with the end users. There needs to be a better user interface, something more along the lines of nodes, like what you see in administrative options, where you have plus signs, or other features. I mean, there's other ways to design user interfaces, and that really does need a lot of improvement. The number one non-interface based complaint is that you cannot have multiple POs for an external section. So if you are sending out fasteners of 10 different kinds of nails, all to be zinc plated, you have to set up 10 different POs, and that is not a popular thing to tell an end user. All right, that those external POs need to be a little more flexible, where you can back tie or tie one PO to multiple value add work orders, or even better yet, create more than one product with a single value add. The most common workaround for that is a spreadsheet, and just not using SX at all sometimes, so for those things. Another major problem is one that David alluded to, and that is very difficult to make changes after VA is processed. And by processed, I mean just anything happens in it, like a printing of a PO, like Shelly brought up, where you can't do overages and underages. If a vendor sends you a partial shipment back, you can't do a partial receipt, so and have it go easily. So there are a lot of issues that way. John brought this up. Replenishment needs to use the same logic as other products. There's all this really amazing fancy stuff in SX about purchasing with economic order quantity, and there are, you know, the mins and maxes in value add are not calculated in any logic that anybody can recognize as being useful to a Grant Howard customer. All right, I don't see any reason why the ordering controls, lead time, EOQ, standard packs, and all of those various things shouldn't be usable on VA products. And in a similar vein, replenishment needs a better interface than a report. And you know, in WebUI, it has changed a little bit, but it's still not perfect. Another common complaint is inventory sections need to be able to be a final step. You shouldn't have to put in a blank section in order just to, you know, add components to something and close it out. All right. It makes too many assumptions that people have to put labor into things, which is not an average case. So many companies don't book labor into their value adds. So, but on the labor functionality, a couple more details. The VAEL labor screen, which I feel is underused by companies, has 2 dates on it, and those dates are not, you know, they're confusing to end users, and that's a slight little user interface change that comes up a lot. Production scheduling is non-existent for companies that have a lot of VAs or actually do repair and stuff like that, like John's company does. Being able to, you know, schedule all of your production jobs and figure out what's higher priority than others is really critical, and it needs to exist. Lack of creature comforts like the displays in VAES and VAEI and VAET, there just aren't enough sorting options or columns. And you need to be able to search by a tied order number or tied customer. There needs to be more fields for sorting, and searching by a component use and a finished good are things that just come up all the time. So, and then the need for a VASP, a template inquiry center, right from IC, IA, and ICIP, so people can see what the components are of something. Very similar to kit production, but that, you know, that inquiry already exists for KP. And I'm adding to my list the quick pricing module that Derek brought up, which is a major issue for other companies too. They just come up with elaborate workarounds. So at any rate, that's more or less what I had to say. I welcome any questions, and I think I'll cede to Daryl now and see what he has to say.
Thank you, Scott. Obviously, you guys are the experts. You are definitely the resident expert. You know what you're talking about here. Daryl is going to add, hopefully, 2 seconds about WebUI, and then also he has a bigger part in the assembly and service SIG that he wants to share with us.
Yeah, Andy, thanks. So I wanted to respond quickly to what David said about the configured price option. That it has only been in kit production up and through 10.3, and then with the 10.3 release as part of the belting enhancements, they integrated it with value add. So it's pretty handy if you have some really intense configurations you need to do. The configured price quote product, which is the product configurator, could be pretty useful as a front end for value add, both internally and externally, because it also plugs into storefront. So I have a couple of things. My name is Daryl Ziegelman. I also work at Central Data. I'm the VP of Product Management, and I focus on the product both from existing customers and new customers. And we, being in the Detroit area initially, we run into a lot of industrial customers, so we've been using the product quite a long time, especially when we got it over to graphical. That exploded the use, and a lot of the implementations that Scott's done has been a direct result of our ability to go out and sell what has been a very useful tool as distributors start to expand into more of a light manufacturing opportunity to maintain their market share and find new avenues for themselves. A couple of things that we've run into over time additionally was a quick way to end a value add. So quite often in a hose assembly operation, the people will go out back and they'll put the assembly together, and then they just want one key in SX.e that says done. and all the parts just get finished. The same thing on the TWL side. What we found, I think David made this comment to me quite a long time ago, is most people who use TWL have worked around it by creating a separate warehouse for their value-add assembly and really never solved the issue of, hey, we need a one-stop place where we can just say done in TWL, and it does all of the steps involved in that process. So that's part of the issues that we see. Now, several years ago, I created what is now called the Assembly and Service Special Interest Group that's part of TUG, and we have our meeting every year at TUG Connects, and I would like to encourage all of the people on this call to please come and attend our meeting and also input on our agenda, because we would love this kind of participation in the TUG Connects SIG meeting. It would be great to get some more people involved and help improve the end result of what we're looking to get from our software and hear from other people. So I will give that input. So Andy, that's what I have to say, and I don't know who my next. You're next, right?
Yeah, there is nobody next. You were wrapping it up, and you did an excellent job. So I think, Gary, we're going to go to questions. If there are questions in the panel, we can do those now. I have some questions too, if we run out of questions from anyone listening in.
Okay, well, we do have a few questions, so I'll go through those. And then also a reminder, if anybody wants to ask a question or has a comment, wants to participate, just raise your hand. I'll be looking for you, and I can unmute you. So the first question is, where is the VA transaction created? Sales, warehouse, or purchasing?
I think, Scott, you can field
I'll speak up. It is very different from company to company. So sometimes it's not any of those, sales, warehouse, or purchasing. Sometimes there's a production department. Many VAs in situations where there's things like Derek can speak to this, rigging, the VA is actually created as a result of a sales order and directly from within the sales order. But it's when you're talking about whose job responsibility it is to do something, I find that probably the biggest percentage of time it's a purchasing function. Usually they feel much aggrieved by that fact, but it is probably the most commonplace. And then the second most common is that there's actually a production department. So
I would say to the packaging folks, I feel like you guys are either production or driven from orders. Do you find any difference? Maybe Shelly, David?
That ours are driven from orders?
From orders or just their production runs in general?
Yeah, well, we have two ways to trigger those. It's an order where it's going directly to the customer, and then it's their forecast where it goes directly to our warehouse and it's stocked there. We have to accommodate both of those.
For us in the rigging, Derek from Haynes, from the rigging, a lot of our orders, our production orders, our value add, are created from sales orders. A lot of the custom ones, obviously, are created from sales orders, but we do have a production manager in our different shops. We have a nylon and a wire shop, and they kind of drive what sits on the shelf, waiting for stock orders sorts. So unfortunately, we're not using the VA replenishment functionality yet, but it's something we'd like to get to.
Anyone have anything else to add? Okay, Gary, next question, please.
Okay, before I read it though, George, I see that you have your hand raised, but my icon is telling me that you didn't enter your PIN, so you're going to have to enter a #132 and then pound again, and I'll come back to you when I can see that you can be unmuted. So the next question is, does anybody have a guide that they provide their users on how to create a product, put it on an order, and watch it go through the stages? A basic how-to guide. The Infor documentation is theoretical. Does someone have a practical guide? And then David White, for some reason, they suggested that you might have such a guide. So that's it.
Well, yeah, we did do screenshots and things for how we run them through. It again, it doesn't eliminate the clunkiness that Scott addressed, but it is just it is that do this screenshot, follow through this way. Remember to mark on the receiver, receive exact quantity only. And again, when we skip that step, that's when things blow up. But yeah, I could put that together and post that on the TUG website.
Okay. Hey, Daryl, since you have some knowledge of web UI changes to this, all these issues with the interface and the clunkiness and clumsiness of the steps, does any of this change or improve with VA moving into web UI?
Well, I think the answer is not specifically. Certainly, web UI has a different interface experience from GUI, but I think it's very similar in the experience that you see in the GUI in web UI. They did add some additional functionality like revisioning. One of the things that people are looking for is, hey, I've got this assembly that we do all the time, but now I need a new revision of that, and that was one of the major enhancements into value add and kit production with the advent of web UI.
Very cool. Was anything else major changed with the move to web UI?
Not that I know of.
Some of the web UI features that are just generic to web UI are very helpful in VA, like the sorting at the top of columns and the searching of components. The general searching function in web UI allows for a lot of that. So that just, VA just happens to be benefit from.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Gary, next question.
Okay. George, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. George, you should be able to talk now.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. George from Flowworks International. Question that an issue that we've run into is that we have value adds that we have both an IT section and an EX. We've been doing a virtual warehouse process to push the VAs through TWL, because up until our upgrade to version 6, version 10 this last summer, we haven't been able to make use of IT sections in TWL. Well, now that that functionality is there, our only problem is we ran into, we have, when we try to push a VA through TWL, it has both an IT section but also an EX section. We discovered that there's a block in that functionality. I'm just kind of curious of the panelists, who else is trying to use value adds that have both an IT and an EX sections on a single value add order and may or may not be using TWL right now?
This is Scott. I can only think of one. And I'd have to check with them to see what they did after their TWL implementation, because they were implemented for a couple years on VA using a virtual warehouse for some of their labor and and sending things out externally and bringing them back and all over the place. So, but they implemented TWL a couple years after they went live on VA, and we would have to check with Andy to see what they're doing on that. So, or with the customer themselves. So.
Yeah, to tell you the truth, I'm not sure either. I'd have to go back and look at notes. What I did
want to make clear. You know which one I'm talking about?
I think so. Yeah.
The one, yeah. They're
in, yeah.
Okay.
I did want to make clear though, and also kind of a question myself. So value add, what George is saying, correct me if I'm wrong, You can send something out to someone to have them do something, and then that can go to the customer or come back to you. Or you can send something to yourself internally. There's a guy sitting in the corner at a desk. He's our assembly guy, and that's an internal, which is very, very similar to a kit. And I've always struggled to understand the difference between why would we use an internal. Now, in George's case, they have internal and external going on the same one, so I get that. But why would I use VA to build something in-house versus using kitting to build something in-house? What are the pros and cons of each of those, and can anyone on the panel speak to that?
I can, if no one else wants to speak. So the number one reason to use an IT section internally is so that you can track your labor by the hour. So how much time you spend on individual sections or individual work orders. With a kit production, you're always estimating or having to go straight in and editing the kit in order to produce actual time. With IT sections, not only can you just log your time in VAEL, sort of like timesheet, but you can also have different rates for different people and different processes. And you also can send that labor straight to work in process as you close them out. So if you have something that takes, like, a couple months to build, you can close out your weekly payroll periods in your IT sections and have them post to work in process and to whatever offset you're using for labor, on a timely basis. And there are quite a few companies that do it that way. So
that's
how
and
I would add, Andy, that you also have an inventory component to that, because if it is going to take more than a couple of hours to do something like you would do in kit production, then the work in process for the inventory plays a significant part, because I don't want to go looking for something that I'm not going to find because it's in the process of being worked on. I want to know that that inventory is out of on hand as real product and is in work in process. So that's one of the major advantages to value add. Scott mentioned it for labor, but also for inventory as well.
Another,
speaking specifically to the IT section. Yeah.
Another factor we run into is that you have some tax jurisdictions that still will levy a business property tax. However, if the property is work in process, value add allows you to report out that actually you have inventory on your general ledger that is in a work in process, and that could, depending on the taxing jurisdiction, that could be a significant tax savings for the business.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. Hey, George, contact me separately about that, and we can start that conversation about that with TWL. Can we squeeze in one more question, Gary, if there's another question, and then we'll wrap up? I know I said 45 minutes, and we're right there.
Yeah, we've got 4 or 5 more, but here's the next one. I'm curious to know how folks are going out developing sales reporting for the actual components of a value add. Many of our suppliers require us to provide activity reporting, as well as some of our account managers are compensated based on that activity. We know that we can get to component activity for kits, but have not been able to do the same for value add.
The right answer there is there's no canned report, but the table you want is VAESO for your activity.
Yeah, but that's something that wasn't mentioned at all by any panelist. Anything else on the reporting side that's needed or you use or you've made up on your own?
Yeah, there is nothing in standard SX that really is very helpful on reporting. You're pretty much in the ad hoc world 100% with that. But if somebody has trouble getting to that, it is just post a question on TUG, and Daryl and I watch it all the time. One of us will answer if you don't get the right answer from somebody else. So But VAE, SL are the line items in kit work orders, so in VA work orders. So.
Right, I said I would only keep you guys 45 minutes, so if anyone has to go, please feel free to drop off. I thank you for your participation, whether you're a panelist or just listening in. Gary, if you want to go through the next couple of questions, I'm happy to stay on as well and answer anything I can. Appreciate that, Scott.
The next one is, I'm interested in what others are doing regarding reporting for commission. We have a VA with 100 line items on the transaction. These 100 lines could include automation on electrical and industrial products. These numbers are reported through PCATs. The OE only allows one PCAT on the VA line, so we're looking at trying to figure out who has the most product on the VA and assign commissions that way. It is not accurate. The current reporting is not at the VA line component level, but at the OE level. The OE line.
I would add the product category as a field on the VA line item, and you might want to take a look at developing a different report if you want it to be accurate down to that level. So I don't obviously know all of the details of the commission program in question, but it seems to me that you might want to refocus your reporting on the VA line items.
I'm not sure I understood that completely. A third of the components are product category A, 2/3 of them are product category B. How do I figure out who I'm paying what?
That's how I understood the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure you can unless you're going to roll that up and then break the value of the finished good into the percentage.
You don't have to pay one user commission on one order. You can ad hoc that out to any number of creative solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we find most people, because distributors are salespeople at the end of the day, you can only code so much, and so most, I'd say it's 50-50 maybe, and maybe I'm being generous, right, Scott, that use the commissions in SX versus use ad hoc reporting to determine their commission.
I would struggle to come up with a customer in the last 15 years that uses the SX commission reporting out of the box without some sort of ad hoc changes. So there's probably one or two, but there certainly aren't aren't the majority. So.
Okay. Gary, we got another one?
Yes. Does anyone use KP for their production? Are you using KP to manage the cost and the inventory?
There are plenty of people that are using it, but it kind of comes back to how Scott answered my question, said it depends on what you're doing and how you want to track that, because the KP and VA internal can be very similar, or they can be very different. Well, Shelly, you said you're doing, right, if you're still on, you said you're doing KP for the box printing and stuff. How does that go?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're going to use KP when we don't necessarily need to roll up all those costs together. We'll apply a load to cover the labor. We can also add the labor, but it doesn't, track it as well as the VA.
Right.
And for the box printing, it's pretty straightforward. You're going to take a plain box, put a label on it, and print it.
So do you add the cost of the label as a component?
The ink?
Yeah.
No.
And you add the guy's labor, his time to do that is on there just as a flat. It took him 3 hours. That's $50. But you put that into the...
Yes. Not always the case. We don't always add the labor. We also use kitting for, I guess, light assembly. So putting styrofoam insert into a box, something along those lines. That's where we're going to put a little bit more labor into it, and that's just a labor line item. And right now, we have one set up for each kit that we use. I don't know that that's necessary. I know we've had a discussion about that, Andy. But the printing of the boxes is pretty straightforward. It's, you know, a service that we provide.
Very good. Is anyone else using KP for some of their functions?
I would add that there are a lot of examples of people who use KP for some of their functions, especially for companies that don't really want to track labor, which, you know, is common among really small companies. KP is the preferred solution, and also anybody who needs the functionality that optional products in KP provides, where you can choose from a list of 2 or 3 components that would go with the thing that you're making. You know, choose a black handle, choose a red handle, and so on. You know, those 2 functionalities are really useful in KP, and they're very popular. So.
And one of the major deficiencies of KP has always been the ability to source kit components, which you got on the value add side, but that is now part of WebUI, that they added kit sourcing in the 10.2 release. So that's a huge benefit to KP. But you don't get work in process. You can't make a buy or build decision. One of the advantages of value add is any item in your inventory, unless you make it, you know, one of those configured parts that Scott talked about, can be built through value add at any time. With kit production, you have to pre-identify an IPSP that an item is pre-built or built on demand.
I would agree.
That's an excellent point, and that it always is, yeah. And it is company-wide as well, right?
Yes, that's a major thing. I would also add that kit production is very good at at its limited functionality. It isn't designed to be anything more than, you know, assembly for the most part. So, and another major issue with kit production is that, you know, you always have to figure out how much of something it takes to build one unit. So if you're building 1,000 pieces of something and dipping it in paint, how much you have to figure out how much paint per finished piece you're using. Whereas with value add, you could just say, oh, 2 gallons of paint to build 1,000 units, and it'll do the math for you. So there's quite a few reasons to go to value add instead of kit production, and when you start analyzing it that way.
Very good. Anyone, anything else to add to that, KP? Okay. Gary, do we have another one, and then we can wrap?
Yes, value add cannot handle price breaks from suppliers. Is this an issue that anyone else sees?
Yes.
I'm not sure what that question means, because I mean, my first inclination is, well, that's not a value add function. When you're buying the components, you can set up PDSVs to do price breaks, but I feel like I'm not actually understanding the question.
Okay.
You know, I would imagine it's got to be on the finished good. Like if you send 9 of these to be coated, it's $10. If you send 10 of them, we'll give you 5%.
Absolutely, you're right in that situation, 100%. So.
Yeah, we would love to have that.
Well, Andy, add that to the list because I would agree.
Got it. Shelly, how does that play out for you?
So if, yeah, with the converting, so as they're putting them, they're putting the rolls of film on to convert. If we have them do a bigger run, we're going to get a better price break. If we have them, you know, do less of an amount, you know, we're obviously going to pay more. So the way we're doing that is all manual right now. We're just telling them what to run, when to run it, and trying to manually combine all these orders to get our best cost.
Yeah. Okay.
And that goes right back to the issue where you can only do 1 purchase order per work order. one external PO. So if you're sending out 6 items to the vendor in order to get that price break, you have to manually break it up for each work order, which is very time consuming. And I often get laughed at when I tell people that. So.
Very good. Okay.
So the guy that asked the question added a comment saying it is the labor price breaks. I don't know if that makes any difference to the conversation.
So that absolutely 100% you're right. It doesn't support that.
Okay. I think we've gone over enough and folks are starting to drop off. So does anyone on the panel have anything else they want to share? If not, then thank you again to everyone for their participation today, and I want to keep this conversation going. Like Daryl mentioned, please come and participate at the SIG meeting at TUG Connect in 2017. We want to see you there. We want to keep this going, keep all these thoughts collected, and get this information to Infor and get these changes made. We need this functionality. That everyone has these workarounds to do all this stuff, and it shouldn't be that way anymore. So add anything if you have. Otherwise, I'm done. Gary, you can wrap it up.
Okay, I'll wrap it up.
This is Daryl, and I would just add the ERS system is a huge benefit. Use it. Tell people to vote on things. Any of these issues that we can get into ERS, that's what they're looking for, and those things are going on the roadmap. So the more that we can make that happen, Catherine is definitely supporting us in that regard.
Thanks, Daryl. Anyone else?
So I'll take all the rest of the questions and put them in a report and send it to you, Andy.
Thanks, Gary. Okay, wrap us up, please.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll see you at TUG Connect.
Take care. Thanks.